Hey everybody, this is CKDU 88.1 FM in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm Jerry Katz. This is Non-Duality Network Talk Radio, and my guest today is James Travers, who's sitting somewhere near me. Hi, James.
Hey, Jerry.
And today we're going to talk about Jean Klein, Dr. Jean Klein, your teacher, right?
As best one can give a label to him, yes, that's what I call him.
Well, I shouldn't say that because I mean on the way, was it on the way here or something I read where the discovery is that there really is no teacher or student. Did you kind of find that about him?
Yes, that's my experience. Again, to be able to say something in terms of a label, teacher is the label that is most appropriate, but the nature of the connection, it's not a student-teacher relationship. So that's what makes it challenging, because what he actually presents and what he represents is that which cannot be taught, and it's just simply being. But the way that he shows up is a pointer in itself.
Just when you say showing up, just the being there.
Yeah, the only way I've ever been able to somewhat accurately picture my connection with Jean Klein is like being in nature. So when you're with trees or flower or with the sky, you don't think of the sky and the clouds as being your teacher, but clearly there's something there that is quite natural, and there is the existence of the flower, the tree, or whatever happens to be unfolding at the present moment. Mm-hmm. And Jean Klein was very much like that. He was so natural that you could only really think of him as like a flower.
Oh. Yeah, I'm just kind of sitting here imagining that. I remember you telling me when you first went to see him in person that you had all these questions for him, and then tell about that.
Yes. Well, my background's in yoga, so I'd been studying yoga for many years, and naturally when one's exposed to yoga, one's exposed to things like enlightenment teachings and awakening and understanding the true nature of being. And I wasn't really getting that from the approach that I had been doing. I was getting better physically and had certain capabilities as a result of the yoga practices I've been doing up until this time. But there was a part of me that knew that when I read the yoga books and the things that the yoga books are speaking about and pointing to, that I wasn't even in the same ballpark as what these things are actually speaking about. So there was a little discontent in the approach that I had been taking up till now. And so I was looking around. And, reading the yoga journal, I discovered an article by Stephen Bodayan on Jean Klein.
Now that article, you actually posted a link to it on your Facebook page entitled The Power of Here. Did you post that? You did.
Yeah, well, there's actually 2 or 3 articles. The ones that I posted are not the ones that I read originally, what first introduced me to Jean Klein. Because I was introduced via the Yoga Journal article maybe the late 1980s, 88 or so, somewhere in around there. And I never met Jean Klein personally until 1990 or the end of 90, maybe right into 91. But I do remember distinctly the actual experience of meeting Jean Klein. And you're quite right. I had a lot of questions that came from that background I was just speaking about. Mm-hmm. So there was something really unsatisfied, unresolved in my yoga practice and what was commonly called the spiritual journey. That for me there was physical accomplishments, but I couldn't really say that there was any great depth to spiritual understanding or understanding of the true nature of being. So
I mentioned that there's some links. And I just should mention that your Facebook page is called the Power of Here.
Yes,
people can just look that up and they'll find.
Yeah, or they can look it up under my name, James Travers. Most of the links are they're duplications. So the Power of Here is one of the pages.
Yeah. So you had all these questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had all these questions that were unresolved, and a friend who had met Jean Klein in person and was somebody who was not prone to exaggeration, literally wrote me a letter and I had moved from where I was staying and teaching here in Halifax, and I'd made the trek across the country. By this time, I was living in Victoria, BC. And it turned out that John Klein was coming to Seattle, Washington, and my friend wrote me a letter saying that John Klein will answer every question you've ever had. So I thought, good, I've got lots of questions. And so I literally, I'd been given 3 months advance notice that this was going to happen. So it was like I met him in September or something, and so maybe May or June, my friend had written me this letter, and so I could plan and get all my questions together. And I had what I thought were a lot of really good questions, because I'd done, 15 years of yoga study, and I'd read the books, and I wasn't a kid anymore by this time. So I had what I consider to be some quite profound questions about the nature of life, about the nature of truth, reality, being. And I made it to Seattle and was there an hour early, literally reviewing in my mind the questions that I had gone over. And, I really did trust my friend, who said Jean Klein would answer every question that I've ever had. And I thought, if I get to sit in a room with this extraordinary spiritual teacher, what would I really want to ask? And so I had those kinds of questions. And I did have a list.
So what was his answers? We want to know his answers. We want to know the secrets.
Well, you have to know that you have to hear the story first. So
Okay. All right.
How the story goes was I sat there for an hour, and I thought I was going to be the only one there, but to my surprise, the room was pretty well full an hour before John Klein was scheduled to arrive. And the scheduled meeting was just on the list. It says meditation with Jean Klein, 7 p.m. And I was there like at 6 p.m. And so were a bunch of other people, as I just said. So me and these other folks just simply sitting there quietly. And about 20 minutes before the allotted time, about 20 minutes to 7, I kind of, some of what I'm sharing with you presently, I figured this out after the fact. I just put things together by reflecting on them. But I'm quite clear that there was a time, 15 or 20 minutes before John Klein actually arrived, that this extraordinary peace came over me. And when John Klein entered the room promptly at 7 p.m., the peace that I was just referring to, it seemed to be centered on him. And, there's a human form, but all I felt was this peace, this extraordinary quality that just made me happy for no reason whatsoever. And although it walked and it sat in front, there was just this extraordinary energy that seemed to be centered on this physical form, but it had a tremendous depth and dimension to it, so it filled the entire room. And it clearly touched me. And I had no questions for that. It just, the answers were just the peace itself. And I studied with him in one way or another for about 6, maybe 7 years. And I never really had a conversation about spiritual matters with him at all, except for the same friend who had told me about him in the beginning, had prompted me. He said, have you ever asked John Klein a question? And I said, no, I don't really have any questions for Jean. And he said, well, you should ask him a question. So I came up with one about deep sleep and about awareness during deep sleep. And I wasn't really serious, and I was kind of making the question up as I was going along. And just the nature of who and what this man represents. He knew that the question wasn't one that really came from like the depth of my being. It was just something that was intellectual that I was kind of curious about, and I was making it up, and he could tell that I was making it up. And so he pretty well dismissed it. He was pleasant and courteous in the dismissal, but it wasn't a serious question, and he answered it appropriately. And I didn't really need to ever speak with him about spiritual matters. He learned through another person that was present at one point that I was involved with yoga and yoga teaching. And I was kind of disappointed at his response. He had asked me actually to come and sit beside him, and he was pointing out some things specifically to do with yoga and yoga practices, because he kind of wanted to highlight those things for me, and he would draw my attention particular to those things. And then at one point, what disappointed me was he turned to me and he says, well, how many students do you have? Now, I just moved to BC from Halifax, and at that point I just started a new studio and I had 4 students. So I told him the truth. I said, I have 4 students. And he says, good, don't take any more.
Really?
So he was, that kind of sums up his approach. He was into quality, not quantity. And so my disappointment was immediately evaporating when I heard that he was not interested really in the numbers, but the quality of how I was interacting with these folks, and that he felt that if I only had 4 students and never took any more, that I could spend some time and go into great depth with just these 4. Now, obviously there's concerns about earning one's livelihood and things of that nature with 4 students, and I did say that to him. I said, well, how am I going to earn my livelihood? He said, well, charge them a lot.
Yeah, that's what he said.
That's actually what he said. Yeah. Now, mind you, I didn't follow all of his directions. I did take more students and found a way to earn my livelihood. But that direction to maintain the quality of the interaction, that never left me. That's the thing that I was mostly interested in. I understand that one needs to earn one's livelihood and all of those things, but one has to put the quality first.
Do you find we have a monthly, well, more than monthly, we have a local group we call Non-Duality Satsang. And yeah, something I notice about you when often we don't know how many people are going to come. Maybe there'll be 15, 20, 10, 5. But I notice your attitude is always that, whatever happens, whoever shows up, shows up, And,
yeah, exactly. It's always right. And again, it's just the nature of the way it is. The influence of Jean Klein was, again, he's very much like a flower, or was very much like a flower when he was alive in the physical form. And I say that for a variety of reasons. The flower is okay with whatever happens. You can come along and stomp on it, and it'll still give you its fragrance. It is totally open to whatever happens or what is not happening. And the other reason why I like to use the word flower especially is I like to play a little bit with words, and I call it a flower. And just the nature of being, and again, my own understanding and somewhat by the so-called non-teaching of Jean Klein, or what I unlearned by getting to be around such an extraordinary sage, was that the nature of life is much more a verb than it is a noun. So even the word being, generally like we associate it with human being, and that we've turned it into a noun. But we do that a lot intellectually. We take the words like being and turn it into a noun. But really, it's a verb. It's the ing of life. That's what life is like. It's seeing, feeling, touching, tasting. And just to go back to Jean Klein, the non-teacher's teaching, why I say it's an unlearning is that what is said, or what he did say when he spoke, he didn't speak a whole lot. His way was largely silence. But there was a reason for the silence and for what I'm calling unlearning. And all of that had to do with that which is prior to conceptualizing the experience of being. And what is prior to conceptualizing? There's simply seeing, perceiving, feeling. There is being without any mental commentary on it. And so all the stuff that one learns, it has its place functionally in the realm of knowledge for functional practical purposes. You and I arranged to meet here at a certain time today to be able to do this program, and you have to have the technical expertise to be able to allow this program to be broadcast over the airwaves. So all that is functional. So that's the role of knowledge. It clearly has its place. But when I'm simply being, and there's no demand to act from memory because I don't have a task that I have to perform, then it's possible to just simply be silent. And even the word silence doesn't get it, because now I have some intellectual idea of what it's like to be silent. But to actually be silent is an extraordinary practice.
Jean Klein says, I got this from one of the articles in the Yoga Journal. He says, and there's definitely a relationship between your yoga and his body work.
Yes.
I mean, there was some kind of transition that happened. And Jean Klein says, in facing the body, one must clearly distinguish between the percept, which is pure sensation, and the effect, which is resistance coming from the I image, and the concept, which is memory. So you have to distinguish between this pure perception that you were talking about, the I image, which you know as a kind of a resistance or a contraction, and concepts, intellectual.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And memories.
Yeah. That, in terms of his body work, that sums up his teaching concisely and precisely. The emphasis was on perceiving. And so what is it that we perceive? So in doing yoga asana practice, the practice of physically doing the postures, hatha yoga, it's sensual. You feel. And so there's the stretching, and if one strains, there's pain. And if there is an undoing, there's nothing really significantly felt in the experience. So the difference between that and the way that typically yoga is imposed by a very Western approach is what I call geometrically correct yoga poses. So you see a pose that somebody calls the triangle pose, and now your job is to impose that triangular shape on the physical body. So clearly that's an intellectual approach. You've got an idea as to what the body's shape is to look like beforehand, and then maybe some physically capable teacher does a demonstration as to what it looks like. So now you're given a visual image as well. And then what you're going to do is practice to be able to do that to represent what you've just been told and your idea of the posture to form this pose called the triangle. Now, in terms of the realm of knowledge, in a certain way that's true, because it does end up being a shape that's a triangle pose. But rather than imposing on the body, more what happens by taking the felt experience, by coming from perceiving, then there is the moment-to-moment experience of exploring and exposing the pose. It's kind of like an artist working with the uncarved block, and you know that the sculpture is there within the block somewhere, and you're simply removing the excess to reveal the work of art that's underneath. And in this particular case, it's not wrong to have the understanding that the pose is called a triangle pose for a reason. So there is a geometric shape that resembles a triangle at some point. But the way that is journeyed from where the present posture, like every posture that the body is in while awake, can be a form of yoga. And then as we work with sensations and perceptions, and particularly with the energy, which is largely the way that Jean Klein worked in his body work, he talked about it as energy body work, there is a felt experience. And so feeling one's way, there is the right level of stretching between underdoing and overdoing, and then if a resistance is met, again, that's the I image, so that I get to encounter any ideas that I have about myself practicing or what I should or shouldn't be doing. And again, the very seeing of this is very revealing in terms of what way I'm going about this particular practice of a simple pose, like a triangle pose.
Mm-hmm. He says, stay with the feeling. Jean Klein says, don't get caught in effort or end gaining. Keep the feeling alive. This is something else he said. It's interesting. I'm just grabbing these things out of the article. He says the real body is emptiness, and you feel the energy body. And he says when you speak of body work, it's mainly to find this energy body. And once the energy body has been experienced, then the physical body works completely differently. The muscle structure, the skin, the flesh is seen and felt in a completely new way. even the muscles and bones function differently. He says, but he says, stay with the feeling. That seems to be the key to. That's what seems to be what you're saying.
That is the key, and it's also his words about the way the body is experienced is altogether different. And so, just to see if I can help with that a little bit, when he says that the body is emptiness, again, that's quite accurate. It's like an availability, an openness for what is there. And then from that quality of presence, that openness, and again, it's not about end gaining, and there's no expectation, it's just simply being open. So when there isn't that resistance of the I image, when there is openness, and there's no idea, again, end gaining of the way that things should be, there is simply the way that things are. And the way that things are is that there is an openness, and in that so-called openness, there's an experience of a body. But you don't really experience a body. You never experience a body. The only thing that's experienced are sensations, and the sensations are felt. So now you're in touch with the energy. This is something as a felt experience. You're feeling energy, and it's alive. And so it shows up in a very definite, very clear way, and it's not intellectualized in any way. It is something which is happening currently. And so without all of that baggage of the knowledge, the memory, the experience of what I think a body is, in the naked truth of the way that it's actually experienced sensually, there is something which is felt. And so now the bones, the tissues, the muscles, we can still use those labels, but they're not experienced as bones, tissues, and muscles. There's experience of being, stretching, feeling, and there's just this aliveness, this joy of being. And it's just that. It's vibrant and alive. And so there's clearly a felt experience, and that felt experience is altogether different than the way that it is typically experienced by the average person who has all of this knowledge of a body, a mind, and senses, which is that all of that is superimposed on the experience. And so the experience is not seen as it is. It's seen through the knowledge of how I think things are, like what I think a leg is, or what I think a hand or an arm or the muscles in the back of my neck are. And so that distorts the actual experience. So Jean is quite accurate to say that what is called the body is discovered in an altogether different way when working with these energies.
And doesn't that happen sometimes when people are practicing yoga innocently? They're taking a half yoga class just to improve their physical appearance or their well-being. And do you find that people accidentally will kind of slip into this energy body, or maybe rather slip out of their mind, their own, their conceptions? My
experience is that what you're talking about now happens generally in under two sets of circumstances. The first is with a beginner who doesn't know what they should or shouldn't be doing, and there's an innocence in their approach, and the so-called beginner's mind that doesn't know about yoga, or this can happen in any exploration of any activity that's completely unfamiliar to the person, or even something that's taboo. Like in yoga, one of the practices are tantric practices, which generally have a sexual component. So when one is exposed to something that is completely foreign or is taboo, and you don't normally think about it or explore these things, then you come to a beginner's mind. So it's not about the taboo thing and just doing it because it is just that, something that's forbidden, and so you're going to do it just for the experience of doing that. But the real reason behind why it's valuable is in the not knowing. And so the beginner's mind has that quality of not knowing, of innocence. And then the second time that these things show up is with the advanced sage, somebody who is so-called been exposed to all the knowledge, all this learning, and has realized that it's not of that nature. And they come to not knowing. They come back to the beginner's mind, but in a very different way. There's a maturity to it. So with the sage has been exposed to all of this stuff, and it knows that it's not really that valuable. It has its place functionally. Knowledge, as I have already said, is very practical. For practical functional purposes, knowledge has its place. Yet, in the spiritual realm, the person who truly understands doesn't come from knowing, but more comes from not knowing. And just to make the connection here, this is how those words like emptiness and the teachings of emptiness and openness, that's really what's meant by that. It's what is meant is a silent mind, that you're not conceptualizing the experience.
One of our internet friends, Vicki Woodyard, is a great writer, and she has a book coming out with Non-Duality Press.
She's a great writer.
Yeah, I mean, they publish only the best people. And she talks about what non-duality is in a lighthearted manner that bears on what you're saying, that deals with this whole idea of not holding on to concepts in kind of a humorous way. Let's see if we can get this on the air. Vicki Woodyard.
Hi everybody, this is Vicki. I wanted to talk about the word non-duality and what it means. I've heard Jerry has asked different people what it means. And at this point, I think it's become just a part of the dictionary and therefore somewhat meaningless, like sex or money, power. It's a word, and you bring to it what you are. And the law of levels is absolute. Vernon Howard said that people on the same level can exchange benefits endlessly. But if you're not on the same level with somebody, you'll never truly connect. Now, what that has to do with non-duality, I have no idea. I mean, really, I have no idea. As I allow my level of essence to speak about non-duality, it is stopped in its tracks.
I hope people could have heard that, the volume. I couldn't get that's as high as I can get the volume on that. But she just stops in her tracks. So she can't really come up with what non-duality is.
Which is actually a very good definition. Because, again, when we're talking about all these non-conceptual ways of being, why do we need a definition of non-duality? The very fact that we can present it as something which doesn't, which defies definition, is, I think, part of what makes it valuable.
Yeah, it's kind of like, being in the presence of Jean Klein. There's no hard answer.
Yes, exactly.
Or concept.
Yeah, because here's a form that we speak of by the name Jean Klein, and he defies description. He defies any kind of pigeonhole that we can put him in. He's not a teacher, and he's not really a human being in a certain way either. He's just somebody who's understands the true nature of being and lives it in such a way that just simply being around him is a teaching.
I just want to say it's 2 o'clock here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. You're listening to CKDU 88.1 FM. I'm Jerry Katz. I'm here with James Travers. We're doing everything here. We got poetry, I think.
Yeah.
And you have a poem there? You're going to read something?
Yeah,
James?
I got
Tell
something
us
that
about
I
this.
think is kind of appropriate for this afternoon's
Yeah.
connection. And I'd like to share it with you. It's a poem by James Wright. It's kind of got a long title. It's titled, Lying in a Hammock at William Duffy's Farm in Pine Island, Minnesota. Over my head, I see the bronze butterfly, asleep on the black trunk, blowing like a leaf in green shadow. Down the ravine, behind the empty house, the cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, in a field of sunlight between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. I lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A chicken hawk floats over, looking for home. I have wasted my life.
Oh, that's it. I've wasted my life. Yeah. And that's like, just as I'm listening to it, and I was expecting there to be more, but it just sounded to me like all the answers. Just like you were saying, in the presence of Jean Klein, his presence was the answer, and he was like nature itself.
Yes.
And that poem is just taking that nature and giving it really only what you could only do with it, which is make a poem out of it.
Yes.
To communicate, I think what you were saying, that is the answer. What he was saying is the answer to all your questions.
Exactly it. Exactly it. Just simply presence. And it's the extraordinary quality of ordinary life. There's nothing extraordinary about spirituality or the true nature of being. There is everything extraordinary about life itself. It depends on the eyes that see it.
And then he says, "I've wasted my life." But you wonder how he's saying that. You'd like to hear him read it and how he would say that.
Well, the beauty of it is,
there's a humor to it.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of interpretations of it, which again, it's the nature of poetry. Why it's so beautiful that it has that opportunity. So, for the real beauty in poetry and art is this space for the witness of the poetry, the art, for the viewer. And so, again, in our interpretation about especially that last line, how beautiful the poem is written, and that last line hits you square between the eyes. And so you can, again, relate it to the things that we were saying earlier about just simply being present to what's happening in the current moment, the ordinariness of things. And if you're not present, or you're intellectualizing, or you have all these expectations about the way it should be, and you're resisting what is presently happening, well, that's a one-way ticket to hell.
Yeah, that's wasting your life.
Yeah, you've wasted your life.
Yeah, so when he talks about wasting his life, he's just talking about all the time he didn't see what he was writing about. He didn't see that everything was glorious and consciousness and God and all those things.
And so where did he have to go? Nowhere. Lying in a hammock is what he was doing.
Lying in a hammock at, what was the title again?
It's William Duffy's farm in Pine Island, Minnesota. But the hammock could be anywhere. That's the whole point.
You can read that again. Can you read it again? I think you should.
Lying in a hammock at William Duffy's farm in Pine Island, Minnesota. Over my head, I see the bronze butterfly, asleep on the black trunk, blowing like a leaf in green shadow. Down the ravine, behind the empty house, the cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, in a field of sunlight between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. I lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A chicken hawk floats over, looking for home. I have wasted my life.
Yeah. It's good to hear that read. 2 or 3 or 4 times. Yeah, that's really, I mean, what would the poem be like without that last line? I mean, you kind of need that to kind of underline everything, underscore everything.
Yeah, yeah. It's like anything. I have a friend who is a sculptor, and he worked for years to make this kind of spiral column sculpted piece, working with stone. And he just couldn't get it. He worked away and worked away and worked away. And he was trying to make it perfect, this beautiful spiral from bottom to top, and have a connection with the bottom to the top, and the whole integration in between with this, beautiful crescent turning of the spiral. And it just wasn't happening. And, he had enough integrity to know that this isn't it. There was something he was moved to do, and it had to do with this stone, it had to do with this spiral, it had to do with this column, but he just couldn't get it. So out of his frustration, he took a sledgehammer to the darn thing and knocked the top off it, and there it was. In its incompleteness, it was complete, because the suggestion of the spiral continuing on beyond that broken top allowed the space for the viewer to be part of what's there. So that last line is the same kind of thing, is that it's a clear invitation to reflect on what the heck does this guy mean? He's wasted his life. So you have to go back and, like you're saying, maybe hear the poem 2 or 3 times. And poetry is meant to be read, so it's beautiful when it's read. And also, again, you can analyze it and things, but the beauty is, again, in the feeling space of it. So, at first, a line like that, or a beautiful piece of sculpture or a piece of art, what's really beautiful, again, about these things is what I was referring to earlier. It's to be vaulted into the unknown, to be in that place of not knowing. That is so extraordinarily valuable. And art, poetry, painting, sculpting, music, dance, song, has the ability to do that. Other things can do it, but art especially is an extraordinarily beneficial and practical way of approaching these things.
Yeah, and art as both a witness and enjoyer of the art, and as a creator.
Yes,
obviously.
Yeah, I mean, who's art done for? And why is it really done? For no reason whatsoever. It's just a celebration of the nature of things, and somebody is moved to do something, and the connection with it is, okay, dance. Dance is movement that doesn't break stillness. What it's really pointing to is the stillness. Singing, music, these are sounds that don't break silence. And then a piece of sculpture or beautiful architecture. What's extraordinary about architecture is it has the form and it's functional, but when it's done really well, it is truly art. And it's a way of an object being in space without disturbing the space.
It's any work of architecture is a massive, just in volume.
Yes.
And at the same time, I guess in the height of its manifestation, it's like a whisper.
Yes.
On its landscape, isn't it?
Yes, it
like
is.
There's almost nothing there.
Yes, that's a beautiful way of saying it.
Yeah.
And so, coming back to Jean Klein, the other thing that Jean Klein was all about was art. He was a musician, violin, but not just music. Anything to do with art, he was very appreciative of. And so, being around such an extraordinary human being, I'd be naturally exposed to his way of being. And, in that there's an invitation to go and explore. And again, the beauty of all of these things is when I say something like dance being a motion or a movement that doesn't break the stillness, the beauty again is in the stillness. We could get biblical and say, be still and know, or the peace that is beyond understanding. That's what those sages are speaking about when they're saying these things. And so artists in their particular mediums, they clearly understand these things. Some of them don't even know why they know. Like my friend with the piece of spiral sculpture that I was talking about, he just didn't know. He just didn't know. He didn't know what to do or what not to do, but he knew it wasn't right. And when it was right, he also knew that this is it. And he knew enough then to leave it alone, because it was then complete. It's like I have a brother who does watercolor painting. I have a plug for my brother, Brendan Travers. He does watercolor painting. He does a variety of artistic expressions, but watercolor is his particular thing. And he can do a watercolor painting in an hour, but the composition, it may take him 6 months to get the ideas to what is actually worth painting, what's actually worth taking the time to represent something. So he will wander through the woods or something. Maybe he does a lot of seascapes and some landscape painting and things like that. So to get the understanding as to what he wants to represent may take him 6 months. The actual technique, I mean, he's accomplished, so he knows how to do these things, and to actually create a piece doesn't take him that long. But to know what's really worth putting your time and energy into, that's what's one of his biggest challenges.
I'm thinking of your friend taking the sledgehammer to that spiral sculpture, and I'm thinking, this is a good way to live life from that place of freedom and energy.
Yeah. Meeting John Klein was the sledgehammer for me. It's like I told you, I had all of those questions. And in walks this being of peace that was just like a sledgehammer. My world was shattered. I say, he ruined my life. I had the pretty good gig going in terms of reputation and status and all of that stuff, in terms of what the Western world says is success. And, in the yoga realm, I was on a path that it was pretty clearly defined. Met John Klein and couldn't do it anymore.
So does that line, my life, I've wasted my life, then sort of apply when you met Jean Klein?
Yes.
In some way?
Yes, because, it applies, but in another way it doesn't apply, because all the things that I had done prior to meeting John Klein were the things that prepared me to meet such an extraordinary person. And to be able to, without having to speak to him about all of these things, understand that in the silence, all of those questions are answered. And that, if I did get an answer to those questions, like if I was to come up with the most elegant definition of non-duality, what good would it do me? It'd be just more intellectual information. But if you can have a term which defies the definition like this, the real value is in that not knowing.
Just getting back to art, I mean, you live your life pretty freely, and would you say that your life is art?
I would say yes. That is the nature of how I approach it. That
even when it's not free at times, I mean, we all have stuff we have to do.
Yeah. But even when is life unfolding? Life is unfolding in the current moment. So the only time I've ever experienced what is happening is what we call the present moment. So in living in a so-called artistic way, again, this is just another bunch of words, but as best one can, there's an openness and availability. And that's the art of it, to not come from the conceptualization and preconceived ideas and notions as to what way it should be. It is the way it is. And again, coming back to the yoga of Jean Klein, which is really the yoga of everyday life. And he didn't like to use the word yoga because it has so much other things associated with it. So he preferred to call it bodywork for that reason. But he could have called it everyday life, because it has nothing whatsoever to do with physical shapes and forms, other than, you do end up doing some of the typical yoga poses because there's other benefits that have stood the test of time to doing particular yoga postures and in particular sequences. But his real teaching, again, if you can say that he taught anything, was a way of being that's simply open to the way that things are. And the best words that I can use to describe that so-called teaching is, it is about perception, And one of the things he did say, although I didn't have a whole lot to say to him, other people asked him lots of questions. So I was present when other people were asking questions that, that were important to them. And the human condition is such that, any question that I have, these other people are going to ask it anyway. So it's not that I wasn't around when questions were being asked. And some of those questions, naturally, I had the same ones as other people. But if one looks at the nature of being, and the thing that Jean Klein would say that points to what I'm speaking about is this. He'd say, you can't have a precept and a concept at the same time. And if you look at them sequentially, the nature of being an infant is perceiving. And the infant hasn't even yet learned to identify with the body or to respond to its name. But an infant from the womb is perceiving. And the medical people and people who do such research, they've documented all of these things, and it's self-evident to anybody that's ever seen an infant that infants perceive, and they can't really conceptualize, they haven't learned the language to be able to tell you what's going on, but they do communicate by their crying or by their laughter or by other means. But particularly, they are perceiving. And so prior to all this conceptualization, there is perceiving. So in the undoing and the unlearning that I'm speaking about, it's not that there's anything to learn. Simply being is perceiving. The very seeing is being. And that's the art. It's not so much what one does. It's like, again, my friend with the spiral sculpture. It's not you have to connect the two ends and do the whole thing from A to Z. That was where the problem was resting, and where his, again, intuitively, he knew that there was something wrong with it when he was trying to do everything for the viewer. But in its incompleteness, in the open-endedness of what he was doing, which in like parallels to what I'm trying to speak about, the way of being that has that open quality to it, and at the same time doesn't deny being itself. There is existence. There is all of the practical stuff of life. That is the art of being.
Yeah, thanks. Beautiful, man. But that's not going to keep people from saying, okay, I hear that, it feels good, I like it, I've tasted it, but I don't feel like I'm there now.
Good. So again, they have to be with the experience of whatever is happening. And if that's something that's said honestly, to be with how that shows up. So if there is that kind of comment that I'm not there yet, again, those kinds of things are going to show up in some way viscerally. They'll have a certain feeling associated with that. Maybe in the pit of their stomach, they'll have this tightness, this knot. Or they might have a migraine headache because they've been trying so hard through the intellectual process. But whatever it is, it'll be some kind of tightness, some kind of physical contraction that's felt. And so when one, again, takes it to the so-called great use of the body, whether it's through yoga practice or through spiritual exploration, is that it is there and it is felt. And so in this openness, without imposing the idea of the body like the way I was speaking earlier, the way a lot of people have been conditioned to do by what they've learned, if one can simply return to innocence and be a not knowing and not deny existence, there is something felt. And if there is that kind of commentary about, oh, all of this sounds really great, but I'm not there yet, show me. Again, that's just intellectualization, show me. What am I going to show you? Any kind of intellectual answer that I can provide for you is just like rearranging the mental furniture. You haven't really gone anywhere. You're still in the realm of conceptualizing.
Can't you sell them some lessons or something?
I could sell them some lessons and make earn my livelihood the way I was doing prior to meeting Jean Klein, but that doesn't get it done. That's not the quality that I'm speaking about. The quality that I'm speaking about is being with the sensation, being with the perception, which is prior to conceiving. And so if they can be with that tightness, if there's something that they're resisting or something that they feel a lack, I'm not there yet, so they feel that lack, that concept will have a corresponding sensation somewhere on the plane of what's called the body. And in their exploration, I would invite them to look at that. And in the very seeing of that, which is the nature of being, that's the doing, and that's the only doing that's required. And so again, this is experiential in nature. It is not something which is available to be conceptualized, because it's a percept. And so if they're going to again just intellectualize the tightness by calling it tightness or contraction, they're immediately going back to the same old, because they're just making a concept out of what they're actually feeling. But to be with the feeling, whatever that sensation is, that tightness or whatever, it's not the word tightness, it's the actual experience of being with the tightness. Then they can see that they're doing that they're the source of what they're, what's behind their discomfort and their suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in that seeing that, oh, it's my resistance or my expectation that is really the real problem here. And I got this because I got some idea of what spirituality should be. And therefore I'm exposing or imposing that idea on the actual experience. And so now I've got nothing but, a mess of suffering, because I've got this idea of being enlightened or spiritually evolved or whatever the idea that the person has, however they word it. And they're not innocent anymore. They're imposing again whatever they've learned, all that knowledge, on the actual experience. Whereas the returning to innocence, like the infant, is simply in not knowing, or going through it all, like the sage, and that person of wisdom and maturity has an understanding and still doesn't know a darn thing.
Just quoting Jean here, he says it's very important to sustain he calls it the organic memory of the unlimited body, to sustain this until it becomes natural. And he calls that being understanding.
Yes.
Not understanding, not having understanding.
Yes.
Or possessing understanding, being understanding.
Yes. He means that it's a knowing as being. You know it by being it itself. So that quality of understanding is, again, not something that is conceptualized, although we make a concept out of it to be able to speak about it and communicate it to somebody else, exactly the same way that Jean Klein did. He had to come up with some way of being able to speak about these things, so he called it being understanding.
I'm getting all contracted and resisting here, because I want to play something else from Vicki Woodyard, and I'm a little concerned that whether the volume's going to work. So let me try this. It begins with a line from Rumi, and just see how this goes. Music is by Jimmy Dabrowski.
Rumi said, there is a field out beyond right and wrong. I will meet you there. For me, what that is saying is that this four-square reality that we live in is not that field. For four-square reality is limited to the human mind. But in this field we meet. And this field is subtle and nuanced and rich with presence, rich with the unknowable, the paradoxical, the achingly tender, the healing. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. Life in the world is life in the shadow of death. But in that field there is life eternal. We often meet there through poetry, art, writings of different kinds that we call pointers. What we must realize is that we are that field. We are the starry, starry night of Van Gogh. We are the Tao. We are the silence.
That's part of what Vicki Woodyard said. We don't have time to play the whole thing for Vicki. I'm going to play it again then on another show. Play the whole piece. But that's it. She's saying it too. We are that field.
Yes.
The
And
unknown,
again, the way she said,
the
out be
Tao.
out right doing and wrongdoing, or Rumi said, and she's repeating it. But, right doing and wrongdoing, these are just concepts, opinions about what's happening. And so that field is what we've been speaking about during this whole program.
Yeah, and it's a good definition of non-duality, maybe, living from that field. I don't know if you can live from it or not, but living as it, maybe.
Yes. As the openness that has space for everything.
Space for everything.
Yeah.
James, will you come back to another show?
I'd be happy to come back. It's always good to connect in this way, Jerry. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I want to thank CKDU. I want to thank the poetry of James Wright, Vicki Woodyard, Jimmy Dabrowski for some music. And thank you for listening. Thanks, Mandy, for being a co-creator of this show. Mandy LaBelle at yogaheart.ca. James, you're at beingyoga.ca. Or people can just look up your name on Facebook.
Yeah.
You have a lot going on there.
Beingyoga.com. That's
And our meetup group meets. We're meeting this Sunday.
Yeah, we're having a Christmas
party this Sunday, December 15th. Go to nonduality.ca for further information. You're welcome to come.
It's a potluck, and there'll be poetry.
And poetry, we don't charge anything. What else? Coming up is Suburban Shadows with Nick BJ and Blues Drive comes after that. I'm Jerry Katz. This is CKDU 88.1 FM. See you next time. Next week we got Scott McGinnis is on the show.
Oh.
Yeah, it'd be great.
I really love Scott. He's wonderful.
Yeah.